like you were meant to be part of something bigger, then maybe unitology is for you.
Released on January 25, 2011 in North America, Dead Space 2 improved on just about every aspect of its predecessor, including many new gameplay features and a deeper story told throughout its rich environments. Isaac is still fighting for his life with his engineering skills, but this time, he'll have to traverse more than just the inner parts of a huge spaceship in order to survive. It certainly gives the player a lot more to look at. Without further ado, let's give Dead Space 2 a deeper look. Dead Space 2 has a deeper story this time around, so let's talk about it, then we'll get into why it's so good. The game starts with Isaac recalling the events of the first game, and how he was unable to save Nicole. Cut to someone trying to get Isaac out of a psych ward, only for the savior to get killed, and the engineer having to run for his life. After the game teaches the player some basics and getting the plasma cutter, Isaac gets a video call from Dana, who claims she can help Isaac out of the necromorph infected area and cure his insanity, so he doesn't have to experience violent hallucinations he often experiences throughout the game. Someone else named Strauss also contacts Isaac, telling him that certain people ran multiple tests on him and other people that knew about the marker, but Isaac can't remember any of it because they gave the subjects drugs to forget about it. It should be noted, Strauss isn't exactly stable or necessarily trustworthy, as he's quite hyperactive and often gives in to his hallucinations and later revealed that he killed his own family. To add on to the conflict, the engineer is being hunted down by an EarthGov higher up named Tideman, who needs every one of the test subjects eliminated so they don't spread the truth. After numerous redirects and close encounters with the monstrous aliens, Isaac finally meets Dana, but is apprehended as she was a unitologist and was planning to use him so he can make more markers for them, but the followers are killed by Tideman's gunship, so Isaac gets the hell out of there. Isaac is once again contacted by Strauss, and he says they can destroy the marker together, so it's time to go find the crazy man. On the way, he runs into Ellie, a survivor who is CEC staff like Isaac, who at first doesn't trust anybody, but does decide to work with Isaac, as there's only so much she can do on her own. Ellie runs into Strauss, and the three sort of meet up, but they're interrupted by Timon, who decides to continue life support in their environment, so it's up to the team to get the power back online so they don't die. Getting the power back is a lot harder than they planned, having to deal with all the deadly necromorphs, moving giant light arrays, and Strauss's violent outburst, but the crew gets it done and gets out of there, only for their train to get stopped by Tideman, and even after dealing with that hurdle, Tideman stops the train once more, and Isaac has to use the conveniently close by Ishimura to line up the tracks again to keep their transport going. Isaac uses the Ishimura as a gap closer and gets back to the crew, but not before suffering from more realistic hallucinations of Nicole whilst on the ship, and Isaac's not the only one losing his mind. Strauss has gotten to the point where he's gotten violent with Ellie, and even takes one of her eyes. Isaac kills the madman and reunites with Ellie, where they use a huge drill to crash into EarthGov so they can destroy the marker and end this madness. But Isaac doesn't want to repeat it last time, so in order to stop another one of his companions from dying, he evacuates Ellie out of there against her will, leading Isaac to take the final steps to destroy the artifact. Isaac gets the marker, kills Tideman, decimates the red architecture, and is left to die, as there's no way out of the crumbling surroundings. Nah, just kidding. Ellie comes back and rescues Isaac. One more thing, like the first game, there's video, audio, and text logs that give some more background about the story, and they're even more enriching than last time because of how deep the gameplay gets into exploring unitology, and how it shows small glimpses of life outside all of this craziness. Overall, I think this is a simple, but good story that, for the most part, appropriately fits in with the mood of Dead Space. One big difference from Dead Space 1's story to this game's story is it's very cinematic, and can get quite dramatic with what it puts Isaac through. The first game took things slowly, and knew when to shock players, but this game likes to get the player's adrenaline pumping by really expressing the dire situation Isaac is in, and often puts him in quite vulnerable positions. The characters are quite likable too, and are reflective of Isaac. Both Isaac and Strauss experience violent hallucinations of their loved ones throughout the story, and do want to destroy the marker, but of course, Isaac understands the hallucinations are nothing more than his mind playing tricks on him, and even overcame them. After all, he had to deal with the marker in the entirety of the first game, so he has experience with the wicked artifact. However, Strauss completely loses it whenever his mind overtakes him, and even did horrible things under the influence of the marker. Isaac feels guilt for the death of Nicole, even if there was really nothing he could have done about it, while Strauss was the exact death of his family. Ellie and Isaac are tough survivors, hardened by the deaths of people they cared about, and even show off some kind of compassion throughout the game. But Ellie lets negative thoughts get to her and affect her judgment, like how she intentionally didn't trust Isaac, and sometimes talks about how it seems the crew couldn't do anything to get out of the mess they were in. Alright, enough of the story. Let's talk about the actual gameplay, starting with the new additions. Players can now look at more than just their objective when they press the navigation button. This time, they can also see where the closest save station, upgrade bench, and store is. Convenient when the player has some credits or power nodes to burn. Players are given more freedom in the zero gravity sections this time. Instead of having to stick to a surface, players can hover and levitate in order to navigate certain areas without having to ground their feet. Players can rotate in every direction and reorientate themselves if they get too dizzy or don't know where they're headed. These controls are actually really good. It doesn't feel too floaty or too tight. It gives the player just enough freedom to move without having it feel like they have to be overly specific with their moves. It makes navigating through certain zero gravity sections challenging, but fair and fun. And of course, there's new weapons for the player to use, and unlike the first game, some of these additions include guns that normally wouldn't be used by an engineer. But since Isaac explores more than the Ishimura in this game, it only makes sense for the stores to give access to weapons that would be used by the likes of EarthGov soldiers. Dead Space 2 came with a multiplayer mode, where two teams of players act as humans, and the other acts as necromorphs, and each team switches sides each round. There's only 5 maps, and each has their own unique objectives for the human survivors to reach, including activating something to destroy the necromorphs, or destroying a marker. Obviously, the necromorph's objective is to take down the humans, and players can choose one of 4 necromorphs to fight the humans as, but they'll have to wait a slightly longer respawn time if they want to play as a stronger atrocity. In typical shooter fashion, players get more upgrades and equipment to use as they level up, like new weapon attachments, and new suits for the humans, and ability upgrades for the necromorphs. One thing that's odd is the player unlocks gun and necromorph upgrades by continuing to level up, rather than using the weapon or necromorph in order to get those attachments or upgrades, so the player can demonstrate they know how to use said thing and get the award they deserve. Multiplayer is simple, but fun. It's nice that players get to play as both sides during each match, so it's not like players constantly have to play as just one side. Although, I will say, from what little I played, there doesn't seem to be a lot of variety in the objectives across the maps, so things can get kind of repetitive due to how similar the map objectives can be. Overall though, Dead Space 2's gameplay is quite similar to the first games, but there's a lot of small things in order to liven it up and give it its own feel, and the story really brings things together to make sure the game has its own unique experience. It's been over a decade since Dead Space 2 released, and it still looks amazing to this day. It's astonishing how detailed everything still looks, and there's hardly any textures in this game that remind the player this title released in 2011. Hardly any textures. Since Dead Space 2's art style is pretty close to its predecessor, the developers decided to change the set pieces and environments of the game in order to keep things fresh in terms of what the player sees. Speaking of which, the world building and environments of Dead Space 2 are absolutely amazing and enriching. The first game did an adequate job of providing players with unique visuals for each chapter to try and make sure each chapter had its own feel, and like the Ishimura was a huge ship with a lot to offer. But since Dead Space 2 mostly takes place outside of the infamous spaceship, the player certainly gets to see a variety of landscapes to explore. It's so cool to run through the Church of Unitology and learn about the religion, while also admiring the art and structures the followers made for their set of beliefs. It really demonstrates how seriously some people take it, and its importance to Isaac's journey. Not only was going back to the Ishimura a nice callback to the first game, but it looks different enough to not feel like a rehash, and shows that Isaac had to go to the root of his issue in order to overcome it. Seeing the vast emptiness of space in certain zero-gravity sections serves as a great way to remind the player they are still very alone on their adventure. It demonstrates how far humans were able to go outside of their own solar system. Aside from the new environments, the visuals this time provide a look into Isaac's mind as he often violently hallucinates. These hallucinations include the screen going red and becoming distorted, and Nicole is usually there with lights coming out of her hollow eyes and mouth, taunting Isaac about how he couldn't save her, and now that she's dead, she means nothing to him. A complete 180 from the Nicole hallucinations from Dead Space 1 that was soft-spoken and held Isaac on the Ishimura. There's also distorted images of Nicole on nearby monitors whenever Isaac has these visions. A neat way to enrich the story and really put the player in Isaac's shoes, not to mention how it adds to the fear factor of the game. Dead Space 2, like a lot of other sequels, also upgraded other small parts of the visuals. The video projections were given more detail this time. They're full color and aren't as staticky as its predecessor. This game's more colorful too, as more of the environments are fully lit, so the player can really look at the areas around them and appreciate all their detail. This addition kinda ruined some of the horror Dead Space had. After all, the first game really knew how to use its lighting in order to immerse and scare the player while they were on the Ishimura, but at least this new lighting makes sense. Isaac goes through a variety of places, so it's unlikely that every single one of them would be destroyed, deteriorated, or not have some sort of running electricity, like some areas of the Ishimura. Anyways, the suits in this game are more varied this time too. Instead of just adding more and more armor onto the rig, Dead Space 2 has different suits made for a variety of purposes to reflect the different types of armor people outside engineering would use if they needed some protection for whatever reason. Jason Graves came back to make yet another Dead Space soundtrack, and it's as good as the first games. It gets under the player's skin with the way it builds tension with the conflict/situation happening on screen by nerving the player with every corner they turn. The soundtrack isn't constantly going though. There are times where the game lets the ambience build through the player's speakers in order to draw them into the necromorph-ridden landscapes and make it feel like they're desolate on their journey. While still on the soundtrack, the credits theme is also really good. It's this real slow somber rock song that encapsulates the chaos Isaac's experienced and the losses he had to accept. The voice acting is, once again, quite good, with the voice actors portraying their characters exceptionally and giving believable performances. Isaac was given a voice in this game too, and this addition was a good idea, because it really adds on to the stress and dire situations the engineer has to face. Dead Space 2 further establishes Isaac's importance in the fictional universe, and digs into the personal problems he's facing, so if our main guy was going through all of this and still remained silent, it would just be really awkward. Otherwise, I don't really have much else to say about the sound department of this game, considering how similar it is to the last game, so I don't want to keep bringing up points that could also be applied to the first game. Dead Space 2 had a story expansion known as Severed, where players take control of Gabe Weller from Dead Space Extraction as he fights off necromorphs and EarthGov so he can save himself and his wife Lexine, also from Extraction. Lexine is considered one of the key subjects like Isaac and Stroph's were, and since they know too much about the marker, they get targeted by EarthGov, but this also means the unitologists are after her too. Gabe makes his way to the psych ward and is able to save his wife, their baby, but not himself. The story takes place during the first few chapters of the base game, and as such, there's a lot of the same set pieces, and players can use everything from the base game in this DLC. Severed is okay, I just don't know why it was made. First of all, it's super short. It contains 2 chapters, and takes under an hour to beat. There's no new unlockables for going through it, and it really doesn't add anything too much to the Dead Space story. It's not like Gabe or Lexine are ever brought up again after this incident, or even what happened to their baby, so why did the story need to be told? Not to mention, the gameplay does nothing new, and it hardly has any new areas, so again, what was the point of this DLC if it did nothing new, or hardly contributed to the story? There was also multiplayer DLC for this game called Outbreak, which added 2 more maps to the online rotation for free, but were only available for the PS3 and Xbox 360. I had a hard time getting multiplayer footage for PC, I can only imagine what it's like for those consoles. Besides Sever and Outbreak, there was other DLC players could buy that unlocked cool new rigs for Isaac to use that had their own advantages, along with reskinned guns that also had intrinsic upgrades. While still on bonus suits, players can acquire more rigs by beating the game for the first time and on certain difficulties, and just like all the other bonus suits, they give some kind of boost. Speaking of beating the game on certain difficulties, after going through the campaign on hardcore mode, players are granted the hand cannon, a red foam hand usually found at sports events that fires invisible bullets, and Isaac even goes bang bang when he fires the finger. Aside from that, New Game Plus and Hardcore mode are also unlocked after beating the game on any difficulty, just like the first game. Alright, one more thing. There's these video files in the game's folders that seem to showcase certain behind the scenes things like motion capture sessions. Funny enough, there's this video, the one on screen right now, that was mocapped but not put in the game, where Strauss bites Ellie and she smacks him with her plasma cutter. Odd that it's in the files. There's also motion capture sessions for Severed DLC too, which is odd because that expansion didn't come to the PC, so who knows why they're here. Alright, let's move on to the issues now. I don't think the horror in this game was as good as its predecessor. The first game knew how to use subtle horror to keep players on the edge of their seats, so when the intense in-your-face moments happened, the tension reached a peak, and not only is the player scared by the sudden presence of danger, but their adrenaline keeps going as they also have to take down the danger. Dead Space 2 lacks a lot of this subtlety, and relies a lot on jump scares, and throwing so much stuff at the player all at once, in order to give them some kind of sensory overload. But it doesn't work that well because the build-up is really fast, it leaves little time for the player's fear to develop. This also reflects in the pacing of the gameplay too, as the game sometimes just throws a bunch of enemies at the player, which feels like artificial difficulty, especially considering the first game was challenging enough without having to do this. To add, the sometimes humorous moments this game throws in, like some of the dialogue said by Isaac and Ellie, and the overflow of toilet text logs in the Ishimura, kind of break the serious tone Dead Space 2 sets, and not in a good way. They feel off and not appropriate at all. Secondly, the new guns really aren't that cool. Like, why use the rivet gun or secret rifle when you have the plasma cutter and contact beam, which are pretty much better versions of these guns due to the fact they do more damage and have about the same ammo capacity. I think Dead Space 2's guns are cool to use a few times, but otherwise, they just don't have the same usefulness of most of the guns that came back from the first game. Other than that, I don't have any other issues with Dead Space 2. In conclusion, Dead Space 2 fell short on a few things from the first game, but everything else was improved in really great and creative ways. The gameplay feels new enough to provide a fresh experience. The story really immerses the player and takes them on a roller coaster of emotions as they experience the many potential conflicts Isaac has to face. The music is that same creepy, skin-crawling tunes from Jason Graves, and the new environments interest the player in the lore and serve as enriching world building. That's kind of everything Dead Space 2 has to offer. 15 story chapters full of intense situations, each with their own cinematic feel, new rigs that are reflective of the new environments that Isaac runs through, a multiplayer mode that's fun and works well with Dead Space's mechanics, a new voice for Isaac that enriches the story as it goes deep into his personal issues, that same old scary music that made the first game great, a really short DLC that really does nothing for the series and isn't anything special or new, fun bonuses for the players to earn when they beat the game on certain difficulties, and a bunch of small things to add on to the player's fun in both the single player and multiplayer modes. Dead Space 2 certainly wasn't as scary as its predecessor, but its new story direction, multiplayer, and single player content are real neat and make the sequel a worthy successor. And until next time, make us whole again.
Imagine it. All mankind brought together with one purpose, with one mind, with one soul. No war, no fear, no hate. If that sounds like an ideal world to you, then look no further. Convergence is coming, and unitology is helping it happen.